The land that was promised. Before America became a country, it was already someone's home. Long before the cities, before the borders, before it was ever called the United States, this land belonged to Native Americans. It belonged to hundreds of tribes who lived with the rivers, the forests, the plains, and the mountains for generations beyond memory. The land was not something they owned. It was something they belonged to. Every tree had meaning. Every river had a story. Every mountain held the spirit of their ancestors. Their lives were not built on taking from the earth, but living with it in balance. Communities were built around respect. Children were raised with stories of the land. Elders taught that the earth was not property, but a relative. The wind was not just air, but a voice. The rivers were not just water, but lifelines. Hunting was done with gratitude. Harvesting was done with prayer. Life moved in rhythm with the seasons. Until one day, ships appeared on the horizon. At first, they were shadows in the distance, but those shadows grew larger, and with them came strangers from across the ocean. They arrived with new languages, new beliefs, and a very different idea of what land was meant to be. To the Native Americans, land was sacred. To the settlers, land was power. At first, there were handshakes, trade, moments of peace, promises. So many promises. Treaties were signed between native tribes and the growing United States government. Documents that guaranteed peace, that guaranteed protection, that guaranteed land would belong to native people forever. But forever turned out to be a very short time. As more settlers arrived, the hunger for land grew stronger, and those promises were quietly broken again and again. Entire tribes were forced to leave the land where their ancestors had lived for centuries. Villages were abandoned. Sacred grounds were taken. Families were pushed away from the rivers that fed them, from the forests that protected them, from the earth where their loved ones were buried. Then came the Indian Removal Act of 1830, a law that forced Native Americans from their homes in the southeastern United States to lands west of the Mississippi River. This journey would later be known as the Trail of Tears. Thousands of men, women, and children were marched across hundreds of miles, through freezing winters, through hunger, through disease. Many never made it to the end. They died along the way, far from home. And still, the taking did not stop. Gold was discovered, railroads were built, settlements spread, and native lands continued to disappear. Treaties were ignored, communities were divided, cultures were pushed to the edge of extinction. By the late 1800s, Native Americans were confined to reservations, often on lands that were dry, barren, and unfamiliar. Their way of life had been changed forever. Today, the United States stands as one of the most powerful nations in the world. But beneath its cities, its highways, its skyscrapers, lies a history that cannot be buried, a history of promises made and promises broken, a history of land taken and lives uprooted. Families walked for days without food. Mothers carried children who could no longer walk. Fathers buried their sons beside roads that led to places they had never seen before. The journey was not just a movement of people. It was the breaking of spirits, the tearing away of identity from the soil that gave it meaning. Communities that once sang together around the fire now moved in silence. Languages that had echoed across valleys were whispered in fear. Ceremonies that had connected generations were pushed into the shadows. The loss was not only land, but memory. Not only homes, but history. Each mile west carried another goodbye. Goodbye to rivers that once reflected childhood laughter. Goodbye to mountains that had watched over weddings and births. Goodbye to forests that held the bones of ancestors. The land was not empty. It was filled with stories that would never be told the same way again. Promises were written in ink, but broken in blood. Agreements made in daylight were ignored in the dark. Words of peace faded under the sound of marching boots and the weight of iron rails. Expansion came with a cost that others were forced to pay. On reservations, life was unfamiliar. The soil was different, the seasons were harsher. The distance from sacred lands created an emptiness that could not be filled. Children grew up hearing stories of places they might never see again, and yet, even in loss, resilience remained. Songs were remembered, stories were passed down, traditions survived in quiet spaces. Identity refused to disappear, even when everything else had been taken away. The story of land is the story of belonging, and when belonging is taken, something deeper is lost. A connection that cannot be replaced by treaties or borders or flags. This is not only a story of